initiative where we've been invited in. Mr. McDonald invited me to, I've got this pen from the Institute for Quantum Computing that Laz Reedy's put together.
There's a whole new world for it.
As well as the Perimeter Institute.
Right.
And it turns out that my dad's focus was math. And I think I could have rebelled to a certain extent. So in Algebra 11, I had a big Trinidadian guy who was like, I thought he was 9 feet tall, but I've been the same height since I was 3. And I had the worst struggles.
He's probably 9 feet taller.
And I remember him in his booming Caribbean accent. He said, "Boy," and he smacked me over the head with his car antenna, which he used to keep us in. "You're going to be a basket weaver. You're going to be a basket weaver." And I was, being real smart back to him, saying, "Well, my granny, she makes actually pretty good money." I was thinking about all the patterns, that my late granny made. And if you've ever seen pictures of me in my former role as National Chief, that hat that I wear, my late granny made that hat.
And it's out of cedar bark. They're incredible.
And so I was horrible at math because it just didn't work for me. But patterns, that's what I grew up with. That's what you grew up with. It's out there, it's in nature, it's, I was the best at finding the fish when I worked on the fish boats. And they're all around us. They really are embedded in the Nechano teachings and in my language and the way we count. It's got that kind of relationality, is what I would call it, where you're contextualizing your local environment. So your way of describing it is embedded within the language. So that our language is over 50 languages. Just consider how rich those are, because they're all from their territories. They all describe the world according to the center of the universe, which is where I come from.
Yeah.
And your home is where you come from.
But who's the center of Turtle Island? Sorry, Shawn.
Well, which brings me back to the Center for Quantum Computing. And mine is the center of multiple universes. And it becomes quite mind-blowing to bring this sentiment back to the thread of what you've talked about all morning, which is relationality. It's interconnectedness. It's wholeness. It's seeing the different parts of reality. It's trying to understand reality. And our languages, our teachings, our ceremonies are all about ways to support understanding the nature of reality. Now, mainstream science and mathematicians at the highest levels, Canada is attracting them into this Institute of Quantum Physics. Now it gets quite mind-blowing. When you start talking about the matter of the universe, the nature of the universe, the ways in which at the nano level life interacts. Our people also have ways to describe that, ways of knowing. Our elders do. So I share that sense of urgency. There is a sense of urgency, the great urgency of this work. It's what we felt with our work. But there's also these tremendous challenges, largely to do with trust. So you end up in these political cycles, which we are right now. We've got another one happening, got another federal election. And I've seen some of the best, and unfortunately some of the worst ways in which these systems interact. So we've got to keep working on that in my mind. And it's not always necessarily just to participate in these systems in that way directly. Very often it's to build systems that are unequivocally bringing us forward and then growing that out. And so you're also helping to define what we might be able to do with our introduction into a ways in. And that's what I'm hoping we can build on. So future conversations, to let this digest a little bit. I would love to see some of our Indigenous young people, before they're even out of grade 12, go straight to the Perimeter Institute and have a link between Indigenous worldview and the latest developments in quantum physics and the quantum world. Because there's no disconnect there, right? Our worldviews describe this, the nature of reality. It's that big and it's that interconnected. And it's just beginning to move in that direction. It took me a week to recover from my visit there because it was just so mind-boggling. It really did. It's like there's dark matter in this room. And electricity will be able to be passed from one place to another without wires in the very near future. Like those sorts of concepts about the energy of the universe and how we're all made up, how life is made up. Scientists moving in that direction. Wouldn't that be great if we had from one of our home communities, scholars, interacting in that way, the kinds of shapes they might bring there. It's So that is an example of something that we get the privilege of being involved in. Certainly we get invited to. And we want to find ways to help, to support. As invited, how can we support this?
It's nice to see you're a dreamer as well. You know, because we think of, it's just, we have these dreams that we want to see come, and you also have those dreams that, you know, some, more often will align with ours if we just think about those things, and it's all very cool.
It's about mainstream flipping. I just keep thinking it was that we were flipped on our heads going up there on the trip. Just even as simple as like being invited into a community that experiences poverty. So we go with an assumption. I went with an assumption, and then there was a feast before our eyes. It's like, okay. Just all sorts of, so it's like having, you know, the physicist in mainstream study be able to see that there's huge knowledge. And let's try and understand that. And we might not understand it because it's so multi-level, but I think part of our work, what we're really strong about doing is just raising the amount of math that's in the communities and the amount of math that's in the children.
Exactly. And I think that same flip that you're describing relates on, you know, the negotiation table when it's a funding negotiation and the federal and provincial governments are saying you have to meet these standards. You know, we really, you know, you've got to come up to these standards. Well, we've got to flip that conversation around, where it's a challenge for the standard to see the indigenous knowledge and to see the different ways of learning, right? As opposed to, here's our standard we're going to impose. No, how is the standard or the system going to see this other way of learning and be able to recognize it? So how do we start turning that conversation? Because otherwise, you know, it's been a dead end for 40 years.
Look, if we looked at the system, the curriculum system, the Ontario curriculum that says in grade 1 children should name shapes of the widow.
Yeah.
In grade 2 they should do symmetry. In grade 3 they get to rotations. We didn't look at that. We looked at the big picture of what can these kids do with geometry, what kind of concepts can they explore through this playful way. Well, they congruence, symmetry, like they were way up to grade levels. So
Exactly, and it takes the skills that you guys are bring that does that interpretation,
Well,
that does that
thanks to
interpretation.
having Joe
We do
Moss.
need to interpret it,
So-
yeah, and, but we,
The lab school.
Yeah.
we do have a way of talking to the ministry. We are
That's
there,
right.
right? They are listening to us. I don't know what it means for change, but I just love how you've just positioned that, right? As we think about,
Flipping things on our head.
We need to
One last
yeah,
policy thing to think about, just it's food for thought. We're at about the 20-year anniversary of the 2%
Yeah.
spending cap, right about now. 20 years ago, the federal government put a cap on spending. So this is where our conversations meet hardcore policy and funding issues. And of course, our term covered, the sitting prime minister and the tenure of this government. And so for the whole time, we're looking and fighting to find ways to give expression to the challenge that we've inherited. The 1.9 billion that we pressed for, we understand, is still within the federal fiscal framework. That would be something like 230,000 extra per year for my village, just for language. If we could figure out a way to draw that down.
Just for language?
Just for
Just
language.
an annual budget. Still wouldn't think it's enough, but it's there. That's what the calculations would cover. So one thing that we're proud of with the work that we did was in the beginning, government said, no, there is no need for more money.
Yeah.
So we had no one convinced about this gap. When we left, there isn't a question about that. The whole country says, no, there isn't enough funding. And that's in large part thanks to the encouragement of Treaty 3, because that's where the press came in for us. But that doesn't mean we've got the how figured out in this country. And the how is often the most difficult part. So when you're beginning with the how, with the process, and building that process together, that's what the treaties were. So 40 years later, we're still pressing to figure out the how, but we've got the what. Now we need Canadian mainstream leaders to support and stand with First Nations education leaders to help figure out the what. And that is the details of how society will say, that's a shameful past that we have, it's a disgrace. Now let's do something about it, and let's do that together. That's the innovation that's being described here today. So, of course, I look over at, people admire and respect who I know who are leaders like Mr. Humphreys, and thankful for your encouragement, along the way here, and your support for the initiative. So I think that's the moment we're in.
Let's hope that there's some interesting dialogue that comes to pass subsequent.
Based model like natural curiosity more readily than one that is a First Nation being pushed down, their indigenous knowledge being pushed down the throat of the mainstream. But if we encapsulate it in a inquiry-based, it's it would be a really good
That would be a dream.
because it's
We get
almost
it
a
right.
trick. We have to trick.
Yes.
It's all like
Yeah.
we're tricksters.
Math is a subversive tool, we've already done that.
Yeah.
They show how language is important. We want to turn the
Yes.
floor over to,
Sorry.
no, it's about,
Yeah.
So
really,
just some,
Rainy
these are
River
really
and
crazy radical
Chief
ideas.
Atleo.
Your head's probably
Rainy
gonna
River.
explode.
Yeah.
It's really quite simple. The Treaty 3 people had described it. They said, give to me your child so that I may teach him or her, and I'll do the same. That's
Treaty
so
conversation.
tricky.
Yeah.
And so simple, so mutually respectful, so full of mutual recognition and seeing. Everyone, people have asked, and I remember my dad being asked in this CBC studio in Vancouver when I was in high school. The moderator was the head of First Nations political leader on stage, and the audience was there, and my dad had been brought in as an expert, I guess. And the moderator asked, so what is it you Indians want anyway? That was the question being asked by the moderator in CBC, 1983 or 82. So not uncommon then, a little less common, said similar, but in different ways now. And my dad, as he normally does, tucked his chin under, stood up, cleared his throat, the way that my dad would do, and he said, recognition. And then he sat down. We left them with one word. And the original treaties were all about mutual recognition. That was the premise. We see each other. So you provide me your child so that I might teach him or her about my ways. And then we'll do the same for each other. That's really as simple as it gets. However we couch it, whatever it takes, the sense of urgency about this. And it isn't just First Nations ways of knowing, it's the power of the notions, or the way in which education's been constructed, which we've inherited. It's very much flows from worldviews that were draped over this country, given expression in all of its institutions, including in federal law. When I sat in front of a judge in my village in a court case on fisheries, the lawyer for the Crown said to me as they were looking at me, "You do not exist as a peoples." So it's 2015, we've not dealt with this yet, by the way, it's still there. And we don't have a treaty in our territory, so we got nothing to go back and look to where our ancestors wrote such a document or came to such an agreement. Because there are some really powerful writings in Treaty 9. There's that great story of the witnesses that were there at the time of the making of Treaty 9 that have now been brought forward, they're now in writing, and now the world's paying attention. Even though the elders have said consistently, each generation, this is our experience, this is what we remember took place, this is our oral history. So that idea of laddering learning, that's the whole point of First Nations pedagogy, Indian pedagogy, indigenous
Pedagogy. Get it right, Shawn.
Going here. Now, when we were doing our work in the Office of National Chief, I would say out loud to Jennifer and others, I would say, because being a student, only for the last 40 plus years at home and at the world, I thought about the technology when Microsoft was just raised here. So my thought back then was, if only we could have some of those innovators in the area of new technology working with us on this, right? Just the way we've been kind of workshopping this concept. What if we did it this way? We sold it. The main point being is that learning occurring adjacent to the opportunity. For me growing up, my late grandfather wouldn't say listen to people. if you want to learn about the world, he would say, watch the animals, watch the birds, watch the animals. They'll teach you everything you need to know about life. So I was thinking about that when I was with the kids. Wonder, the next question you want to ask is, what can we learn from the raccoons here in Toronto? Right? Some really powerful lessons that they can teach us about what's the life of a raccoon is, or what are the birds teaching us? When I was growing up, the method of inquiry wasn't disconnected from the environment. It was those that are living things. What are they? How do we teach each other? Because they're just as different peoples are there to teach one another. Different parts of life are there to teach each other. We teach each other. We rub our bodies with the different species and when we do our ceremonies. And so our very DNA is going back into the tree when we finish that ceremony. And you've now got trees that are 600, 700, 800, 900 years old, and you can go back and you can know what species of fish, what other organic material have been integrated now back into that. So you teach kids about the system of, you give your first set of bones back at your first fish of the year, and it nourishes. It's a reciprocal, regenerative kind of economy or relationship with the world around you. It starts to emerge. Anyway, the main point I'm trying to make here, not doing it very well, is that we've seen this explosion in advancement in technology, and you begin to look at that and understand it. And then I'm watching what Mike's doing. He created this Perimeter Institute. He put 150, 170 million. This is back to this notion of the economics of this conversation, because they're all real economics. So in my view, it's equally important to quantify this in economic terms so that you can speak to the economic world. We interact with the TD, they're participating in investments on the full range of economic activity in a country like Canada, which is mostly a resource-based economy. And Indigenous peoples are shaping the resource-based economy. It's like we've got a willful blindness, to borrow a finance term though. We've got willful blindness on the quantification of Indigenous titling rights and treaty rights in Canada, to the extent that we've got absolute billions. We've got a laboratory type of notion draped around this work. So in other words, it's coming from, it's somewhat connected to the method of scientific inquiry about bringing an issue down to its most minute and then looking how to ladder forward a fix. And I'm not sure that it's a fix, it's a thing. That's why I come back to process innovation, which goes back to the treaties. So what is old is new again. That's what it is. But that does require, though, that the powers in institutions, which is why we were so interested in this initiative in Oise, not that we, as two people, as one part of the initiative, would do anything. But we have a very similar feeling about, like, we can help be conveners when necessary. We can help be the sinew to link together. We can help to reflect back to Boise to say, you're doing really good. Here's the collection of things, and here's where we can go, right, to get to the vision. What's the dream then? Because in my view, the major mainstream education institutes have helped to get us where we are. We've inherited a very
Damaged.
Industrial focus, to create human capital for a market economy. Whereas what we're really talking about, whether you talk about from an Indigenous perspective or not, is actors in a more civil world and society. We interact with each other in the living environment differently than we have. Not just about massive exploitation of individuals or the environment around us. But we've also inherited a reality that we're still a resource-based economy, which is why you've got ring of fire conversations in the East, why you've got oil and gas, LNG conversations in the Atlantic. And why Canada is a first world country and First Nations that might be 70th on the Human Development Index are still concerned with and working directly with sometimes the 80 million Adivasi in India. Because they don't have the ability to be in a room like this right now, many of them. So that's where Oise is so important, because it's a global conversation. It's a conversation that's not Indigenous or First Nations, it's Canadian and it's global. And this is where Oise rightfully belongs. Now at the end, you have then the work of a laboratory. It's a more equitable type of a form of inquiry that's occurring here than in the scientific method, so you've freed yourself up from that. but you're still working against the most powerful forms of thinking that don't necessarily like or get, or this is super radical. And you do have to figure out strategies. I really agree. And that's the work that we've been, it's been a privilege to be involved in, to try to be constructive disruptors. Where something's in it for everybody, right? Because that's really what the treaties were always about. In my opinion, the little that I know, we don't have them, but we've got the teachings that are identical. When I listen across the country, listen to the ways elders or leaders would talk about their responsibility to their people, I feel the same way. I don't feel that now at this juncture in my personal life only about the villagers and the houses, First Nations, but about every learner, and we never stop being learners. The ones though in the grades that are here are now learning what we always dreamt kids would learn about, right? Because when they leave this institution, they now can be actors in a more civil world where we get to see one another, where we didn't when I was growing up. We didn't even see ourselves in the curriculum. We didn't have our own story. You don't have your own story, you don't really exist. You don't have a history. You commit suicide. You hurt each other. You hurt others. Others can't see you. They misuse you. They misplace you. You go missing. You go murdered. You're not seen in society. So that is the horrific reality of what we've inherited, and it's got great momentum. That's where the sense of urgency comes, that I feel so strongly that we should be addressing. How to get this so that you have a significant shift then was what we were working on so hard, but always skimming across the surface. So like water bugs, we never got to see the depth and the richness of what we've had shared already only in less than one day. We didn't get that privilege. We saw little bits of it and we go, whoa, that was real. Then we got to go to the next thing. That's part of the systems problem that we've got. It is really a part of the systems problem because we're in the room with the Prime Minister. We're pushing on ministers. We're pushing on education systems. And we're working with chiefs. And of course, First Nations leaders get along perfectly and in harmony all the time. Complex, right? Complex systems. And that's the reason why we've got to find a way through, because we've seen in this very civilized, first past the post democratic system that we have, that our kids get lost in this. And that's very hurtful. That is probably the toughest thing for me to personally witness, is to be pushing up against the system, and then going as far as you can, as far as your being can take you, and then you see behind the curtain for what's going on at the highest levels in this country, and you think there's got to be a better way to do this. There has to be a better way. I mean, it's really, really difficult. We can't just wait for somebody on a white horse to ride along. That's not how this is going to work, or it's going to transform. The transformation's happening here. How do you grow that out now? How do you grow that concept out? That notion of fundamental mutual respect, recognition, the essence of what the treaties have instructed us to do, and move away from this lurching from donor to keep something moving and growing. And how do you have it so that it's sustainable over the long run? That's the real challenge. I come back to the point that...
That's exactly what everybody here is interested in as well, sir. You're absolutely right.
That's sort of, mostly this is now therapy the last 15 minutes for me.
And for us.
Such an incredible challenge, and you want to protect so that something can be maintained and intact, but as with any of our work, we let it go. Like, you have to let it go too. You have to, it
To the
doesn't
higher
go.
power, let it go too. And that's one thing we do. These aha moments too is, like as part of moving forward, you have to just, and then also, let it go.
Stay in the work, right? But not hold so tight so as that you hurt its ability to grow, to take on new life.
I think our day, I know that you have to go, you have to.
Well,
go.
I
You
know
wanna
I
say
talked to
something?
Bill.
We have to say
Brent's got one
something.
thing to talk about.
Yeah.
You too.
An international gathering in Fort Francis in August.
Yes,
Okay.
I'm not sure, Sean, if you've heard of WINEC, the World Indigenous Higher Learning Consortium. We are hosting the conference this year in Fort Francis. Seven Generations is, and so we'll contact you through and send you guys an invitation, obviously, and there's a lot of different things that are happening, and I've asked Bev and her crew to do a presentation because of the research that has been going on. Because part of this conference is there's a research component to it, so you hear different things from different indigenous nations and institutes across the world, what they're doing. Like, you know, the Hawaiians are very strong in their immersion schools, and the Maoris have the goal of, you know, 500 PhDs from, you know, by 2025 or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different aspects of it, and yeah, we get to host it this year.
What are the dates?
Yeah, it's August 10th to the 15th that week. And there's, you know, visits to the